Hey team, we got a great podcast for you today because today we're talking with Justin Michael. And you'll remember Justin. Justin's been on the show before because along with Tony Hughes, he authored an amazing book called Tech-Powered Sales, Achieve Superhuman Sales Skill. And this book is really a Bible for the sales tech stack that you need to contemplate to have the right conversation with the right person at the right time. So great read, great book. Both have been guests on the show. Today, we're talking about Justin's latest book, 2024. It's called Sales Superpowers, a new outbound operating system to drive explosive pipeline growth. And gang, I have talked to a lot of thought leaders in the SDR, BDR space, filling the top of the funnel. I also consider myself a little bit of a thought leader in that space as well. We've trained hundreds, if not thousands, of SDRs. I always learn something from Justin, and this book is required reading if you're in that SDR space. So Justin's a world record-breaking outbound sales maven who's arguably built the deepest client acquisition model of all time. It's called the Justin Michael Method. And we're going to get into that Justin Michael Method today. We're going to talk a lot about mindset, about coaching, about some approaches to email, approaches to voicemail and telephone. And yes, the telephone works. We're going to talk a little bit about sequencing. And boy, we're going to talk a lot about thought leadership and how you get yourself in a position of growth orientation. Super interesting conversation with Justin today. He's got lots of communities and sources of value to help you elevate performance. So he kind of really aligns with our value system, which is trying to increase the performance and professionalism of B2B sales while improving the lives of salespeople. I really enjoyed my chat with Justin today. I think you will too. And if you do, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast. Here's Justin Michael. Hey, Justin, welcome back to the Selling Well podcast. It's great to have you.
It's a pleasure to be back. I'm sitting in my Zen garden. I have a lot of Matrix references in my books, so I just like to beam in from Tokyo in the multiverse.
I've never read a book with the amount of references you've got. You've got Matrix references, you've got Dale Carnegie references, and you got a reference to Chuck Woolery. And those of you who are not 40, Chuck Woolery was a game show host in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He was dynamite. I have never seen so many quick references. Unless you've read dozens and hundreds of sales books, you never pick up everything. I just love those references.
Thanks. My mentality is really being a synthesizer, and it's really dangerous to write sales books if you read a lot and you've done a lot of sales, right? Because it's easy to fall into a derivation of Sandler or a derivation of Challenger or Spin.
Yeah.
And so I really think like the Elon Musk story, goes to the government, he says, I want to build rockets. They said, okay, sir, 7-year wait. And he goes, well, where can I get some molybdenum? Like where's a mine where I can get some tungsten and some iron, and he just starts to deconstruct the rocket and soup to nuts build the thing. So what I isolated is when you look in the kind of pantheon of sales books, and there's so many great ones, the majority, like 98%, assumes there's a customer, there's a client. And so we have this, let's progress a deal, let's qualify, progress, close the deal, right? When we get to the very top of the funnel up here, it gets a little quiet. And you see things like Jeb Blunt, fanatical prospecting, which is a great foundation. You see Grant Cardone, 10X. You see Jordan Belfort. You see a lot of these confidence, volume, traditional approaches. Sandler has some great adaptations and methodologies for opening calls and prospecting too. Definitely. I've done some Sandler training in the past. What I wanted to do was embrace the technology revolution at the top funnel, because I found as a technology rep in SaaS companies, exactly, my day was I sit down in Sales Navigator, I go into Zoom Info and look for the phone number and email. Then I try to like dial and catch someone, and then I try to sequence email, and then I have to personalize it and then set up the calendars and then record my call. And it was all this tech stack stuff because I need to get the customer like opening is the new closing.
Hmm.
I used to work for LinkedIn, the Empire State Building, and sell Sales Navigator. If you can believe there was a day where people were thinking, should I pay for that? But now it's the Bloomberg terminal, right?
Right.
So when I write, it's pretty crazy. Like I put 2,000 people into 5 documents. I spent about 300 hours over 6 months. I took a lot of feedback. I had hundreds of coaching sessions during that time because I do executive coaching. And every time someone asked me a question, I put it in there. Then I
Yeah.
got a couple editors in England to lower the Flesch Kincaid because everyone said tech-powered sales was too hard to read. So I made the reading level like high school, college, like high school. And then I found in my base of 50,000 people, the top 3 people that understand GPT prompting, right? This whole chat GPT engineering of like prompting it and stack prompting it and all these different shop prompts and different things. And they have like little blurbs and segments in there. And that makes it, I challenged them and I said, I don't want this to be technical for now. I want you to write about ChatGPT and LLMs as if we're at GPT-10.
Yeah.
And what are the universal principles for prompting a machine so it can think like a human and spit out B2B verbiage and start thinking? And so that's the GPT lab that flows through the book, which was Greg Meyer. And so that was great.
So, gang, we're gonna just get established as a bit of a foundation here quickly. So, Justin mentioned tech-powered sales that he wrote with Tony Hughes. Tony Hughes has been on the book, sorry, been on the podcast before. He was great, just like Justin was. About a year and a half ago, we interviewed both of them to talk about tech-powered sales, a book I loved because there's 6,000 probably by now, different technologies to help us have the right conversation with the right person at the right time. It's overwhelming, even if you dedicated your life to this. But what I find with tech-powered sales, it was great for categorizing the things I need to think about and then gave kind of top lists of technologies that we could go and leverage so we don't get overwhelmed by the tech stack. But today, when we talk about sales superpowers, let me call it out before we get in here too deeply. The joy of doing our podcast is we don't have 1,500 podcasts. We have 100. And the people who are on our podcast, I read their books. I go after them to join the podcast. They don't come to us. I go and reach out and ask them because I'm a fan of their books. And I am a fan of this book, Sales Superpowers. So if you're an SDR, BDR, you're an account executive where you actually have to fill your own top of the funnel, which is basically everybody in business today, you need to read this book. And one of the things that's very unique about this book, about filling top of the funnel, outside of the depth and experience that Justin had, if you know what you're talking about, you know actually where his depth and experience came from. But I really do like the fact, Justin, that you do respect some of those core foundational business models and books. Neil Rackham spin selling, Miller Hyman strategic selling. You talk about Sandler. The truth of it is, and we read 100 sales books a year at least, 60% of many sales books comes back from one of those foundational models. They came from, frankly, a lot of Dale Carnegie, 50, 80 years before that. And that came from ancient wisdom, from Greece in certain periods of time. So, in terms of interacting with a human being, it hasn't really changed dramatically over time. So, but you need to actually capture this with a voice for a new generation. But in terms of figuring out what to do, once you understand those things and you can have a great conversation, there's nothing better than this book for an SDR or BDR today.
I'm honored by that because I started to realize there are kind of 7 areas that humanity uses to develop business. Now, there's 400 million small businesses worldwide that are the engine and backbone of the
Wow.
global economy. And I would say there's probably a million SDRs in SaaS and tech, and maybe 11 million sales reps in software technology. Um, no one has questioned really the call opener, the first 3 to 7 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this idea of heuristics. So if you take linguistics, which is the syntax, the words, the way we talk and communicate, heuristics are shortcuts over the top. And I've seen that in David Hoffeld's book, The Science of Selling. It's a term taken from computer engineering. My brother's an engineer at Google. What I'm talking about is rather than memorizing a script or a template, or a pattern, you actually look at the meta of what does it mean. So you tell a joke that's a humor heuristic. You compare another company that's social proof heuristic, right? You could have pain or fear, emotional resonance. You could have brevity. And by stitching together the bounding box around communication, it changes the way you communicate.
Yeah.
And you can take a 22-year-old and now they can communicate to a 54-year-old exec making seven figures. And now we have conversational parity. And so it's
Hmm.
a very fast way to upskill and get on the same wavelength. So basically, the way that phone openers have been for 100 years is the same. It's permission based. I call you and ask for permission. And what I argue in the book and what I did in my methodology called Ruin, Multiply is I just think it kind of lowers your status if you ask permission. Like, could I get 27 seconds of your time?
Yeah.
It works with tone, sure, but it's like if you're selling a seven-figure product, you can't tell it in 30 seconds. Another popular one now is you don't know me. I'm reminding you I'm soliciting.
Right.
The most famous one is Did I Catch You at a Bad Time, which Aaron Ross, who's a friend and mentor, created. It's so popular, it's been fatigued and saturated. They've heard it a
Right.
lot. Now, it
Yeah.
has a Chris Voss mechanic because it's a negative question in that, did I catch you at a bad time? They say no. So you're
Hmm.
asking for a no rather than yes, which is like a pattern interrupt. And in a way, that comes from Sandler, in my view. I'm very quick to attribute everything, but I love Todd Capone, who did the transparency sale and was my first boot camp trainer at Salesforce in Indianapolis when it was Exact Target. And he goes back on his show, the History Podcast, to the origins of Calvin Coolidge having a sales kickoff in 1910 or something. So we're constantly exchanging. I'm saying 3% of the market's in the buying window. Chet Holmes, what's that come from? He's like, we people were talking about the small piece of the market in 1890. So to your earlier comment, right? Um, I think that fundamentally what I've done on the phone with my techniques is divergent to the last 100 years. I believe what I've done in email and in one-to-one DMs, which are really post 1993, right?
Hmm.
I have
Right.
created like a Napoleonic asymmetric warfare or pattern interrupt where I'm doing something different on a neuroscience perspective that stands out to the prospect.
Well, one of the things that's so important, you reference this multiple times, and just editor's note here for those listening, Science of Selling, David Hotfield, he's been on the show too. So if you want to take a look at a past Selling Well podcast, he's been on the show. But one of the things I think you referenced so well is we can't take the LinkedIn platitude of an opener and say, I'm going to just apply this across my entire team through automation. It's going to work. First of all, LinkedIn platitudes, you get what you pay for. And then secondly, it changes if it works, right? So if it works really well, people scale it and they automate it, and then it stops working. So you have to be nimble enough, no different than any super high-end athlete comes up with a different way of approaching the sport, and somebody can defend against it. They treat it differently. You have to be able to acknowledge, assess, adapt, change along principles. And that's another thing that I really like about your books, Justin. Clearly, you've been through the wars a little bit, but you do get back to this kind of mindset and principles in terms of we've got to make sure we can add value. We've got to understand business acumen and industry acumen. For heaven's sakes, folks, get away from pitching. The pitching,
Yes.
the pitching came from venture capital going into SaaS and just scaling up sales teams so fast, they didn't invest in training, or the person training the team had been doing it for 6 months. So not everybody's Salesforce that can spend that kind of money on it. Just people got lousy training and they became a bad, whatever their bad boss was coaching them on, that's what they did. That's why we've got so much churn in professional sales today. In your book, by the way, it was one of the things I was taken back of. We'll get into some of the detail here, and I want to talk about all these things: email, calls, text, objection handling. But at a higher level, again, it seemed like your book this time had a slightly different tone than some of the other ones I've read with you, where you got into mindset, starting with the mindset. And then you spent quite a bit of time on coaching. Now, obviously, you are a coach, but tell me why it had more of a focus on that and where you've got to in that space.
So it's a bit metaphysical, but as I've gone on a journey from being kind of stuck at 45K a year to, by 31 without a college degree, earning over 100K, and finally getting to Salesforce and LinkedIn after many rejections and sort of the pursuit of happiness story. Just making the most calls and taking the toughest gigs, like working in call centers in Costa Rica. Um, it's a great country, but where I was managing wasn't the safest location there. I wasn't out on the the beaches,
Oh,
but
wow.
it always sounds a lot more glamorous. But I would always take the hardest jobs, and I basically worked my way up to Salesforce and LinkedIn just by dint of experience and merit. So yeah, like I'm self-made and I'm self-taught, and what was happening inside my mentality and my mind and my self-talk rapidly, dramatically changed. Now we know that your head trash, right? Like what's in your head, whether that's Tony Robbins or Sandler or any system. If we think, I can't do this big deal and I'm sitting in front of you trying to close a seven-figure deal with a CFO, not going to happen. They're going to sense it. But it,
Imposter syndrome or negative
yeah,
talk.
self-sabotage, but at a very deep level, your identity needs to shift. So one of the big ways that reps can shift is really starting to serve, feeling the service and the joy of transforming a customer's business. And I had a lot of signposts. There's this guy, Tom Radel at Salesforce, who was a former NFL player. And I sat with him in a blizzard in Chicago during a Challenger sales simulation on a break. And I said, what are your favorite books? He said, you're overcomplicating it with all the books. He looked at me and said, Justin, just sit down, look them in the eyes and say, I'm going to transform your business. And I was like,
Hmm.
wow. The reason I emphasize coaching is because ultimately you have to coach yourself until you're coached. And then ultimately, if you're in this racket for long enough, you'll be coaching teams and
Yeah.
you're going to have to motivate others. And so the exploration of I've trained and managed hundreds of reps. I've coached 1,000 reps. I've advised 200 teams. Now, we can go even crazier to psycho-cybernetics and Maxwell Maltz, and 5%, you know, of your waking reality is your conscious mind, and maybe 95% is subconscious. Some eighty
Hmm.
twenty this, like 80% of your success in life is the inner game and 20% is the outer game. So I'm huge when I coach people on figuring out what's inside the head of my client and what are they thinking and what's the repetition. We have 70,000 thoughts per day. We're not our thoughts, we're not our mind, we're not our body, we're the
Yeah.
consciousness behind it. So from being we shift identity, that changes thinking and that changes doing. But we have this ego, and what it does is it creates sabotage and it holds us in homeostasis at an exact income level. So we're making $95,000 and we get promoted to a 150K job, and everything goes wrong perfectly so we can be comfortable again. We can never get enough of what we don't need.
Yeah.
Our comfort zone brings us back and we subconsciously self-sabotage us. So people come to me trying to 2 to 5x their income, trying to blow it out, hit President's Club, make their number, all this stuff. And you see this cyclical manifestation. And that's why I really just got into mindset and positive mental attitude and John Wooten and all the law of attraction, neo-transcendental stuff, because it's medicine for the heart and mind for
It
these
is.
kids that are lost and they're getting rejected all day and they might quit.
Well, also their view of what success is sometimes. So I think that's something a bit of a challenge for the younger generation too. But I noticed so many themes reading that really resonate because all of us battle with this, by the way, folks. None of all of us have some degree of imposter syndrome. No matter what we're doing, we're going to feel it at some point. But Justin was just referencing, he's got this great Venn diagram where he thinks about doing, being, and thinking within the book. And I think that's a really important thing to get this abundance mindset, where the universe isn't trying to get you. The universe is actually providing opportunities for you. Just got to take a pause. Maybe it's a bit of meditation. Maybe it's a bit of mental preparation. Enjoy what you're doing. And that idea of every interaction with a client or a prospect or a guest on the Selling Well podcast or anything, you're of service. You're just trying to see, first of all, be curious. So always trying to learn and develop. But I think it was Nick Morgan. It sounds like you've read everything a lot, every book out there. But Nick Morgan from Harvard talked about us being able to sense somebody else's intent in milliseconds upon meeting them. And so having the intent of service, I do want to help. I do want to help you achieve a better business outcome. I do want to help you be successful in your business. I have value that I can add in this conversation. I'm not going to pitch my product. I'm actually going to talk about some insight or value or best practices or trends. Or in genetic sense, you probably want to know what other clients like you that are running call centers are doing right now. I'm not going to tell
True.
you specific things, but I'm going to give some ideas here that, so you can stay ahead of the curve. So I think that mindset is such a critical one. Starting off what we do, it's tough to sell. A lot of rejection. I think we need some mental fortitude. We'll talk about your honey badger. But I think it's a really important one, Justin. I'm glad you start with that in the book, and I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, take paranoia, and there's this funny word called pronoia, which is to flip it. The universe is plotting to do me good.
Mm.
Take the rapper 50 Cent. He takes 9 shots to the face and he lives and he sees himself and he goes, this is a miracle. And he lives life from that place of a miracle. And look what he accomplished. I mean, I think he invested in vitamin water from Glissot and made a fortune. You know what I mean? He's a strong businessman. Wrote a book with Robert Greene. It's fantastic. It's a street hustler's interpretation of 48 Laws of Power. I love it.
Wow.
But all your weaknesses, if you're listening now, are your strengths. It's a double-edged sword. Like I have no college degree and I've moved up into, I don't know, the top 1% of this industry repeatedly. In regards to shedding the profit motive like a skin, now we're all taught money focus. I hired him. He's so money focused, him or her, them. Like that's the goal as a salesperson. Well, Ian Koniak, who was like the top rep ever at Salesforce, he said, read Go Giver by Bob Berg. And I know Bob, we've all read some of the great books. It's a parable. It's like Og Mandino and the greatest salesman in the world, or Frank Bettinger and How I Raised Myself Up, like these wonderful mindset books, right? And you read it and it's all about paying it forward. The minute I finally got on calls and I didn't want to close the person, the floodgates open
Yeah.
because that little dot,
Yep.
that nanoparticle of blood to the great white shark was always there. And you can't coach people like that. I can't like close my coaching clients like, yeah, I close. No, I take
Mm.
on the burden of their case. I now have to help this person shatter their income ceiling, locate their unique genius, find shortcuts, and like I want to get results. I want them to reach a better future in a far better state. Now, if you create your future from your past, you're forever a victim of your experience. But if you create
Mm.
your future from your future, it's extremely powerful and it's infinite possibility. And that's a quote by Werner Erhard, and I love that. So you hear pronoia and future from the future over and over in the 3 books, but I'm hammering it into your psyche purposely because I want you to shift from fear and worry and all the external, like, what are the tactics? What are the hacks? Is it Sandler, Miller, Hyman, Challenger, Spin, Medic? I'm like, it's in your head. It's the fact you're looking outwardly to solve your sales problem is step one. What's wrong? So let's get into the rest now. Um, just
Yeah.
wanted to really underscore that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but you certainly did. And so, yeah, let's talk about what we're going to do. Let's jump into a couple of things. And folks, again, this podcast is not something that's a replacement for buying and reading the book. Okay. Buy and read the book. You'll come back to me and thank me for suggesting you do this. Many of our clients who always listen to these podcasts, go and do it now. It aligns perfectly with many of the things we teach on. But let's do a bit of a quick roundtable, Justin, so people get some value out of today, in addition to everything else we've covered off here. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of things. Let's start with the telephone. I can't tell you how often we get brought in to coach organizations where someone's pulled a platitude from LinkedIn that says the telephone's dead, and with love, I'll show them exactly why that's not the case. So we might do a couple of days worth of telephone prospecting in front of a group of people to show them that it's absolutely not dead. But let's talk about some of your approaches on the phone. Then we're going to talk about email. Then we're going to talk a little bit about sequences.
Yeah, so I was greatly honored that Art Sobchak from Smart Calling.
Love him. He's
I
been
read
on the
his
show a
book.
couple of
Yeah.
times.
read his book and the re revision, and I've been in touch with him for like 10 years, but he read this and he gave it a positive review, and he didn't even have to. So thank you, Art, if you're listening.
Great guy.
Um, yeah, so I'm never actually saying that what you're doing on the phone right now won't work. If you have tonality and you have a strong frame, to quote Oren Klaff, you can crush it on the phone with almost any script. The issue, though, is a lot of the models are quite predictable. Um, you absolutely in 2024 should be prioritizing the telephone as the tent pole to your strategy. I was part of that research and combo prospecting with Tony Hughes, where if you get an email, call, right? If someone views your profile, call. Like someone comments on something on LinkedIn, call,
Yeah.
and then invest, if you're a manager out there, in data, not just Zoom Info, but hitting that against a VA operation to clean the lists or working with Lead IQ or CloudLead.co. And there's so many different ones because what you want to do is get phone numbers that ring. Now, Connect and Sell looked at about 10 million phone numbers, and they found that 50% of the meetings were from fully navigated dials. What does that mean? It means that the cell phone direct sell is not the holy grail. A lot of these folks, it's still about leaving a voicemail through the switchboard, getting through a gatekeeper, and dialing in through a phone tree,
Hmm.
right? So you need to get masterful at calling gatekeepers because you need to go to power. In an organization, it's pyramidal. You go top down, bottom up, middle out at the same time. Why? Because if you call just the C levels, they'll freeze you and say, um, fine, leave it with me, or they'll delegate it down to who you sound like. If you try to get groundswell and call low, some small fiefdom will catch you and block you from going up to the CRO.
Hmm.
So what I do is I call up and down the org chart and I gain intel at various levels, and I take that intel with me up and down until someone stops the cakewalk, like the music stops and says, I'll get an email and say, hey, this is Jane's team, call off your dog, stop calling the whole
Yeah.
company, stop sending Venn diagrams to everyone. So that's the why behind calling, and then the techniques to do we could get into.
So let's just call out while you're on it, because you talked about the pyramid, top down, bottom up, and also flanking. And I love
Yeah,
this idea of reaching out to salespeople, take calls. So if you're trying to get some intel and some insight, they'll respond, they'll take an inbound call, they'll share. And by the way, there's a karma about that. They're doing
totally.
outbound demand generation, right? So they're willing to lend a hand. So the other great tip, gang, I just love this one is, which I did know. Here's one I didn't know, which is when you're in LinkedIn and you see somebody you're reaching out to, the on the right hand side that people also looked for. Very interesting because it may not be somebody you would have logically gone to or flanked in that organization or another organization. So I think tell us a little bit about that tip. That's an interesting one.
I'm so glad that you caught that. That's such a small nuance, and it's made companies that I've worked for millions of dollars. So two office giants merged, and I needed to get the chief digital officer. And so I went to LinkedIn and I put people also viewed, and there was a VP of financial planning and analysis. And that time I wasn't as smart as today. I just thought, well, for some reason it was like a hack that whoever knows the person, even if it's a different company, my
Yeah.
past company, it's like the water cooler is people also viewed. And now I know that's true because people are turning that off. I called him and I got through to his cell phone. He picks up, gave the value prop. He's like, yeah, here's the cell phone. Give him a call. I called the chief digital officer of a Fortune 100 on his cell that wasn't available in any database. It's a private cell. I talked to Vern. He didn't respond. Then I went to my own CEO, and then she sent a message on LinkedIn. And the combination, we ended up within
Wow.
2 weeks on site in Boca Raton, flying in. This became like a multi-$100,000 deal and was very successful. Another great phone story is I tried to get to the chief marketing officer of Marriott. Not easy. I was reading an article in Wired magazine, and there was a quote in there, and I call this hyper P in the book, hyper personalization. So I read about these new apps where you can open your hotel door with the app. Well, we
Yeah.
had a geofencing technology that was very accurate, so you could serve like different offers at the pool, at the front desk, out on the golf course, something like this. So I
Love
called
it.
her phone, right? I think I dialed Discover.org which is now Zoom Info. Friday afternoon, 4 p.m., leave a voicemail. I'm like, hey, I saw your quote in Wired. I have this technology. Now I'm doing the combination, right? Call, voicemail, email. Leave the voicemail, send an email. Hey, per my voicemail. And I put your quote in Wired as the subject line. Within I'd say 15 minutes, she responds
Yeah.
and loops in England, in London. Then on Monday, the next week, I call London, explain the whole scenario and what the tech is and how I got to the CMO. And I get transferred to Plano, Texas. And within a few weeks, we're on a plane going to Plano, Texas. And so I'm sitting here literally just using the Justin Michael method, making this stuff happen. But I hadn't really codified the method back then. It was just, routing and multi-threading and doing what it takes to
The
smartly
fact,
use the phone.
this is the beauty of it. I think people who achieve a certain level of proficiency in anything, they have this open mind to a lot of different things. And so, the top hockey players in the world, the top trial lawyers in the world, they're always looking to learn and understand what other people are doing. And there's no real absolutes, never do this, don't do this. What I really love about that is, in one sense, when you think of your sequences, in some sense, you say certain areas, certain levels, we can use some automation with some basic personalization, but at certain levels, it's got to be hyper personalization. So the further up we go, as soon as you leverage somebody's quote, for heaven's sakes, of course, they're going to respond. I always call this out, Justin. I get, cold calling. I get a lot of email not cold call. I get a lot of email spam because although I don't do anything in the funnel, I'm listed as a CEO. The hard work gets done by other people, but I'm listed as CEO. I just get pounded. It's so easy to get my attention. All you have to do is say, Mark, when you were talking about value proposition, in the second minute of that video, I loved when you said this. If you say that, I'm morally obligated to take your call. It's so easy. But again, all I get is I get 5 times a week. We're a sales training company. 5 times a week, I'm going to get email blasted by another sales training company. Okay, so that's what happens. They don't even look at our website. They have no idea what we do. They've just taken a list and blind. That's this noise that it's so easy to stand out from these people if you do some of the things in Sales Superpowers, because it's a dynamite book. Let's jump over to quickly email. You talk a lot about, let's get away from text. Let's get to images like the Justin Method Venn diagram. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the whole idea of like a Justin Michael method is, obviously there's the David Sandler method, but ultimately at the end of the book, I say it's the Mark Cox method. Like the goal is to make it your own,
Yeah.
disassemble it, and make it a steel alloy with what you already use. Yeah, so visual prospecting, I almost called my method Venn diagram selling. I was kicking around 2016, 17 in a company called Tune, and there was a chief revenue officer, this guy, Ralph Hurt, and he had this 350 page sales kickoff document. I was onboarding. I was like, this is impressive. This is MBA level stuff. And inside it, he has these market breakdowns, full Deloitte style of like all these different Venn diagrams. And I was so taken with them. I thought, wow, I'm going to send these in emails. So I took one of them and I sent it to the chief digital officer of McDonald's out of my Gmail. And I booked a meeting on the first send. So I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Oh,
Right. He immediately looped someone in and I had a call. Then I sent it to the VP of mobile at Home Depot, and my phone rang, my cell phone rang, and the guy goes, pitch me. He called the phone number in my signature. In 12 years of
wow.
prospecting, no one had ever called me back, even off my phone messages. So like that was like the Doc Brown flux capacitor, like falling, hitting my head on the toilet and inventing time travel, right? And I thought, wait, maybe something to do with it. So over the years, over the last 8 years, I've helped people build thousands of Venn diagrams. So I don't know if I can divulge this, but there's this company with about 1 billion in revenue, and they have this extremely sophisticated Venn diagram that looks like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I mean, I wish I could show it to you. It has like these wheels that looks like a crop circle, and they've set 60 opportunities in the enterprise, driving tens of millions in funnel with just sending this diagram. Here's the reasoning.
Wow.
Images process 60,000 times faster than words. 90% of what the brain retains is visual. Words don't exist. So I thought, like, here's the tombstone. Like, you're going to one of these big cemeteries, and there I am. And on a tombstone, it says, email is visual, right? And phone is power transfer. So email is not about templates because it's about heuristics and it's about the images in their mind that are the connotation of the words. So you think of Starbucks, you think of coffee, right? You think of Ultimate Driving Machine, you think of BMW, like the old Al Reese YouTube. So what you're trying to do with words is put an image in their mind. And we all know that people hate to be sold, they love to buy. They are triggered emotionally, but they rationalize with logic to close. And those are different sectors of the brain. So there's all these like really complicated brain diagrams in books. And Oren Klaff has great stuff on the croc brain. But here's the idea. You got an old brain, like the lizard brain. Then you've got the, neocortex. And so the problem is between phone and email, we use the brain wrong. And here's what I mean. When you interrupt a human on the phone, boom, old brain, fight or flight. And so you need to calm down that person, say their full name, let them talk, make them safe, validate them, not the reason for my call, not combative, not rebuttals, not because they're going to be not interested because it's the old brain is reacting and the
Yeah.
front brain is catching up. When you email people, you need to trigger the old brain because if you send them all this stuff to the front of their brain that's logical and happy, it never triggers the amygdala, the emotion, for them to have a visceral response. And so humans are loss averse and risk averse. They are not pleasure seeking. And so you have to be a merchant of fear. And people say, well, you have all this like reverse engineering, and it's like, is this even ethical? You play with people's minds, Justin. I say, well, if you sell a product and service that is a 3x ROI, if you transform their business and it's good for them, you have to move them out of their comfort zone so they can change. And I think that's the most ethical thing you can do. So if you got to use a tactic to get them out of their own way, no one else is going to do it. Help them help themselves.
By the way, theories of persuasion have been out there for, again, thousands and thousands of years. And hey, we're all victims of this. We have our cell phones and our mobiles, and 80% of, everything we do comes through the mobile. And who doesn't miss the dopamine, hit of scrolling through our mobile? There's very smart people have figured out how we actually do this, so they get us connected in. But by the way, a couple of thoughts just to throw out, folks. I've referenced this before. I love the old lizard brain, new brain, emotion, fact, system one, system two thinking. Daniel Kahneman. We've talked about that book on this podcast every third episode. The hardest read I've ever read. By the way, that's the most difficult book to read I've ever come across. It's so hard to capture the 135 cognitive biases, because every time you look at one, you think you've got it. How many books do you read a week? By the way, you must be reading 3 and 4 books a week. This is insane, the stuff you know.
Well, it's funny because when I first got on the phone with Mark Rivera, she was just like, "Are you an encyclopedia?" Because I was talking very fast like Mark Andreessen. So lately I've been experimenting with like not taking caffeine because David Goggins actually doesn't take caffeine. And I've been doing experiments between the beta focus state of the brain and then states like theta and alpha and the impact of, you know, geometrically sacred music like solfeggio frequencies on the brain to relax, to
Whoa.
focus, binaural
Whoa.
beats, all this stuff. So I've been doing a lot of this stuff. However, there was a time when I was on the road for 10 years where I just digested this stuff like candy, but I did like what Alex Hormozy said. I would get a pile of books, and if it didn't grip me in the first couple chapters, I just abandoned
Yeah.
or read a Blinkist summary. But stuff like Mastering the Complex Sale by Jeff Toll, or New Power-Based Selling, I've read some of these books 5 times, like
Mhm.
Mehan Khalsa, and then I've gone and contacted every single author who would talk to me. These days, I spend more time editing my own writing than even writing.
Wow.
So if you look at it with Justin Michael Method series, you've got, I think, 150,000 words there. And then, you've got like, I mean, yeah, another 200. I mean, so I put out like 500,000 words of published writings in the past 7 years, and I've gotten faster and faster. I also did a book with my co-founder, Julian Imchinsky, called Reinventing Virtual Events, which is a go-to-market book. I don't know if
Oh,
you're aware of
nice.
it.
Nice. I'm not. Thank you.
But that's a cool one too if you want to check out my thoughts on marketing.
Well, listen, we'll wrap it. I know how busy you are, and we're going to wrap this up. I got to call out a couple of things. First of all, I'm so super happy to reconnect with you again today. So
Yeah,
thank
it's been
you,
great.
thank you, thank you. For taking some time to talk to us. I do love the book Sales Superpowers, a new outbound operating system. to drive explosive pipeline growth. It's actually fantastic content and a very, very interesting read for those of us, who enjoy, understanding and developing and trying to take to the next level. If you've got growth orientation, this is for you. If you're starting in sales development or business development, this is for you. All of Justin's links will be in the podcast here today. But Justin, we got to stay in touch, and thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It's been such a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've put out some free guides called the Codex Guides, Codices. And so they were put on Reddit. I think like 25,000 people got them. So
Whoa.
if you reach out, I'll share them with you. And they're immediate, like heuristics, formulas, frameworks that you can apply right now to emails, calls, social selling, visual prospecting, video, all that good stuff. And yeah, I'm coaching some amazing teams and individuals and incubating new writings. I was just on a call with Aaron Ross the other day. That was great to
Wow.
catch up. So I mean, I've really had a lot of support from the entire writing community as well. So grateful to see how well this book's been doing. I think right now the book's selling at the pace of gap selling. I put out 5 books, but this one is the one, Sales Superpowers especially. I think, tech powered sales was like, Iron Man and Jarvis suit, but they interviewed Stan Lee about the Spider-Man character, and it was the most successful even after Superman because it was a real human being that becomes supernatural or,
Yeah.
extra sensory and gets these superpowers. So like if you feel average or you're not that good at sales, I get it because I was average. I was making 45K at 31 with 10 years experience. I managed 1,000-person team. So this is a book for you. You can turn your life around with what's in that book, and I'd be honored if you leave a review.
And what's the best way, Justin, to connect in with you? Of all the different links we'll have in the show notes, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm pretty accessible over LinkedIn. Just follow Justin Michael, top voice on there, and I try to answer everyone if I can and just be helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Justin. This is not going to be the last time we're going to talk for sure. And team, thank you so much for joining the Selling Well podcast today. We run this podcast because we're so intellectually curious about people like Justin and the great work they're doing. And we want to increase the performance and professionalism of B2B sales because we believe by doing that, we actually improve the lives of professional salespeople like you. We also know we're not perfect at running this podcast. So please send your comments on how we can make this more valuable to you. Keep sending them to me, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. As you know, we respond to each and every piece of constructive criticism we get. We love the constructive criticism, by the way. That's how we really improve this. And by the way, you've given us some great ideas. So keep it coming. Other authors you'd like to see on board, other methodologies you'd like to talk about, other formats. In the meantime, we're actually recording this one 2024 in January. I wish everybody an amazing 2024 where you're happy, you're healthy, you're prosperous, and you're giving back into the universe that love it shows you. Thanks, everybody.